As we continue in the book of Obadiah, I want to share verse 8 and talk with you for a few minutes today about wisdom. Verse 8 says, "On that day, says the Lord, I will destroy the wise out of Edom, and understanding out of Mount Esau." You'll note in the daily Bible readings that I'm doing that I encourage you to take a look at Jeremiah chapter 49, verses 7 through 22 today. That's a companion passage. That's Jeremiah's denunciation or condemnation of Edom for some of the same reasons that we read about in Obadiah. And part of it is this trusting in human wisdom or their own wisdom, and how up against the judgment of God that's futile. And I want to also read to you today a few verses from Paul's letter to the Corinthians, from 1 Corinthians chapter 3. And this is part of a discussion about there's dissension in the church around leaders, and it's about teachers and the church under God. And Paul has something to say about wisdom. You may be familiar with it, beginning in verse 18 of 1 Corinthians chapter 3. "Do not deceive yourselves. If you think that you are wise in this age, you should become fools so that you may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. For it is written, He catches the wise in their craftiness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are futile." Here Paul is quoting from Job chapter 5 verse 13 and Psalm 94 verse 11, but it's something that we see in Obadiah and Jeremiah and here in Corinthians, and we also see it in the book of Proverbs, the contrast between human wisdom and godly or spiritual wisdom. And you may remember, if you went through the book of Proverbs with me, that we are encouraged over and over and over again to seek wisdom, to seek understanding. So obviously God wouldn't on the one hand tell us to do everything we can to get and to grow in wisdom, and at the same time tell us that wisdom is futile and worthless. So what's going on? Well, it's the difference between human wisdom, human knowledge, and godly or spiritual wisdom. And the wisdom of God, as Paul writes about in Corinthians, often stands human wisdom upside down, or puts it on its head. And if you look in 1 Corinthians, that's where also Paul will say that, hey, not many of you were wise, not many of you were rich, not many of you were powerful, yet God uses these smaller things or weaker things often to build God's kingdom. So the wisdom of God is that it's better to be humble than proud, that God is with the poor and not just with those who are well off. It's that God will use the weak, not always the strong. God will use the younger, not always the older. When you look at the sons, like we saw back in the book of Genesis, with God using Jacob and not Esau, who are the ancestors of Israel and Edom, who we're talking about in Obadiah. So, pursuing the wisdom of God is what we are being encouraged to do, and not to trust just in our own wisdom or knowledge.